The food bank director called me on a Monday morning. Her name is Wanda Price. She never calls before the sun's up. She said, "Otis, you need to come to the co-op meeting Thursday." I asked her why. She said, "Just come, wear your work boots, sit in the back." Then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone. Something in my gut went tight. I didn't know it yet. That call would change everything. Welcome back to The Forgotten Father. Grab your coffee. Get comfortable. Remember this, the people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment. Be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Otis Pruitt. I'm 73 years old. I live outside Ames, Iowa. Been here my whole life. Never wanted to be anywhere else. I've driven the same rust-spotted Chevy since 1999. I wear a canvas work coat with my name stitched above the pocket. My leather work gloves are patched at both thumbs. I never replaced them. Some things you keep on purpose. For 47 years, I've worked as a laborer at the Pruitt Family Co-op warehouse. I load trucks. I fix the loading dock doors. I know every squeaky pallet jack in that building by sound alone. Walk up to me in the parking lot. You'd hand me a delivery slip, not a co-op board seat. That's exactly how I like it. Quiet men get underestimated. Underestimated men get to watch everything. I started as a farmhand when I was 16. I worked my way up slow, one harvest at a time. There's a food bank director named Wanda who's worked alongside our co-op nearly as long as I have. She calls me the quiet giant, because everybody comes to me eventually anyway. A broken forklift, a late shipment, a family that needs someone quiet to help them load their car. I helped Wanda get the food bank's first walk-in freezer, quietly, years back. She's never forgotten it. Wanda is the closest thing this co-op has to an early warning system. If something's wrong, Wanda knows before the newsletter does. My son-in-law, Douglas, chairs the co-op's board now. Douglas came from an agribusiness consulting firm, not a field. He married my daughter Faye 6 years ago and climbed fast inside the co-op leadership. Within 3 years he was board chairman. He wears pressed khakis to the grain elevator. He calls me Otis in a tone that sounds like he's doing me a favor. It started small, with Douglas. At Thanksgiving 2 years back, he asked me to park my Chevy behind the barn because it didn't fit the image for a co-op anniversary photo. I moved it. Nobody else at that table saw anything wrong with that. At Faye's birthday last spring, he introduced me to a state agriculture official as my father-in-law, still hauling pallets at 73. I let it pass. A man doesn't build a life keeping score on birthday dinners. At Christmas, Douglas mentioned in front of the whole family that he'd always wondered why a man could work a warehouse for 47 years and never move up to management. My wife Louise's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I told him some men aren't looking to move up from what they're good at. He said, "Sure, Otis," in the tone of a man agreeing with a child. I let it go. I never minded being underestimated by Douglas. Not until the co-op's 75th anniversary banquet. The Pruitt Family Co-op turns 75 this year. The board planned a big banquet, state officials flying in, agricultural press invited. I wasn't seated with the honored guests, not officially. I was there because Wanda told me to come. I stood near the back in my canvas coat. Name patch straight on my chest. A cup of black coffee in my hand. Douglas took the podium around 7 o'clock. He thanked the state officials. He thanked the board. Then he gestured toward the back of the hall, right at me. He said, "And let's recognize our warehouse crew, keeping the co-op running since before most of us were born. Folks like Otis here." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the hall. Folks like Otis. Like I was part of the folding chairs stacked against the wall. Faye wasn't in the hall. She'd stayed home with a sick kid. I don't think she heard him say it. I want to believe that. I clapped along like everyone else. Inside, something old and quiet woke up. I almost walked out right then. I got as far as my Chevy in the parking lot. Keys in the ignition, engine off, hands on the wheel. I sat there a long time. Part of me wanted to just drive home. Forget the whole evening. Let Douglas have his laugh, the way I'd let him have 100 small laughs before. I thought about retiring quiet at the end of the season, letting the co-op be whatever Douglas wanted it to be. Then I thought about a winter 44 years ago. A widow named Edith Marsh lived 2 farms over. My own father drove her a truckload of grain every month for a full year after her husband passed. He never once mentioned payment. I sat with that memory until it settled something in my chest. I turned the Chevy off completely. I walked back inside. Douglas kept talking after I sat back down. He announced the co-op was optimizing land use allocation ahead of a sale of outlying acreage to a developer called Marlowe Land Partners, a $28 million land deal, pending final board approval. He said streamlining legacy commitments twice. State officials nodded like that meant something good. I know what those words mean, coming from a man like Douglas. They mean cutting whatever doesn't show up on a balance sheet. I've watched consultants like him my whole career. They talk about optimization the way a fox talks about henhouse security, confident, reasonable sounding, never once mentioning the hens. I found Wanda by the coat rack after the speeches ended. She didn't smile at me. She said, "Otis, walk with me." We went out to the loading dock behind the hall. She pulled a folded printout from her coat. She said it in front of me like it was something dangerous. She said, "Douglas's land deal sells off the Pruitt family farmland trust plots. All of it. Starting next quarter." I stood very still. Wanda didn't rush me. She let the silence sit there as long as it needed to. That's one of the things I've always respected about her. She knows when a man needs a minute before he can talk. The Pruitt Family Farmland Trust sets aside 400 acres specifically to grow food for the regional food bank, free of charge, every single season. It's been running for 30 years. Most people at the co-op think it's some old government program that phased out years back. Most people don't know I fund and hold it myself. I need to back up. 44 years ago, a widow named Edith Marsh lost her husband and her only income in the same season. My father, without being asked, set aside a section of our own land and drove her a truckload of grain every month until she got back on her feet. He never billed her a cent. He told me later that land means nothing if it can't feed the person standing next to you. I never forgot that a stranger's generosity is the only reason our family farm ever meant anything at all. I spent the next couple decades saving quiet, a little at a time, the way you'd fill a jar with coins nobody's watching. 30 years ago, I had enough set aside to formalize 400 acres into a permanent trust for the food bank. I asked the co-op to call it simply the community acreage, vague enough that nobody connected the warehouse laborer to the man who'd endowed it through a family trust. I liked it that way. Generosity shouldn't need applause. My lawyer, a woman named Constance Pruitt, no relation, wrote one clause into the trust at my insistence, back when I first set it up. As founding trustee, I retain a permanent seat on the co-op's land board, with veto power over any sale or repurposing of the trust acreage. Nobody at the co-op reads founding trust documents from 3 decades ago. Douglas certainly hadn't. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it. It costs you nothing. It means everything to us. Thank you. Genuinely, I went home that night. I told Louise everything. She's 71 now, still sharp enough to win the county fair pie contest every single year on instinct alone. She listened without interrupting, which for Louise is its own kind of alarm bell. When I finished, she said, "So Douglas wants to sell off food for the hungry to a developer." I said, "That's the shape of it." She said, "And he called you part of the folding chairs in front of state officials." I said he did. She said, "Well, I hope he enjoys the surprise." Then she went back to her quilting, like we'd just discussed the weather. I didn't sleep much that week. I called Constance Pruitt first thing Monday. She's handled my paperwork for 24 years and doesn't rattle easy. I told her what I'd found. She went quiet, which for Constance is rare. Then she asked one question. You want to stop it quiet? Or stop it loud? I told her I wanted it stopped for good, and I wanted Douglas to understand exactly why, in a room he couldn't spin his way out of. She said, then we do this at the full land board meeting, on the record. Everyone present. I met Constance in her small office above the feed store on Grant Street. She spread the trust documents across her desk. She read the veto clause twice, out loud. Slower the second time. She looked up at me and said, Otis, do you understand what you're holding here? I said, I thought so. She said, you're holding the only thing on this co-op that a board chairman can't override. She said the clause was airtight, drafted clean. No ambiguity a developer's attorney could exploit. I asked her what I should do with it. She said nothing yet. Let Douglas build the whole case for selling that acreage. Let him put it in writing, in a boardroom, on the record. Then you use it once, and you use it right. Over the next 5 weeks, I did what I've always done. I stayed quiet. I got organized. Constance pulled the original trust documents, notarized copies, the whole paper trail going back 3 decades. I asked her to schedule the land board vote in front of everyone. No shortcuts. No private sign-off. Douglas, thinking it was a formality, agreed right away. I kept working my regular shifts through all of it. I loaded trucks. I fixed the loading dock doors. Wanda brought me coffee every morning and asked why I looked like a man carrying something heavy. I told her it was nothing. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me for a second. But she let it go, because that's what Wanda does. Douglas walked past me twice that month at the warehouse. He said morning, Otis both times, same tone as always. Like I was furniture that happened to speak. 2 weeks before the vote, the Marlowe Land Partners team toured the acreage. 4 of them, in matching khaki jackets, clipboards in hand. They walked the fields like they already owned them. Douglas led the tour personally. He walked them straight past the community garden rows, no stopping, past the sign listing the food bank's weekly harvest totals. One of them asked what that sign was for. Douglas said, legacy allocation, being reassessed. I was repairing a fence post nearby. None of them looked up at me twice. I finished the post. I went and sat in my truck a minute, just breathing. My granddaughter June called me on a Sunday. She said Douglas had been stressed, working late, talking about a big opportunity that would secure the co-op's future. I asked if she knew what the opportunity was. She said something about a land sale, nothing specific. I asked if she was doing all right. She said she was tired, but happy. I didn't tell her what I knew. Some things a grandfather protects for as long as he can. The land board meeting landed on a Thursday evening. Same hall as the anniversary banquet 5 weeks earlier. 9 board members. Constance as counsel. Douglas at the podium with a slide deck, the Marlowe Land Partners logo glowing in the corner. I sat in the back row again. Canvas coat. Name patch straight. Same seat as always. Nobody in that room expected me to say a single word. Douglas walked through his plan. Selling the 400 trust acres would bring in $28 million and clear debt ahead of a planned equipment modernization. He said it would let the co-op secure its long-term future. He said the numbers simply make more sense this way. Like arithmetic could excuse what it actually meant. A board member near the door, a woman named Louise Tran, asked what happens to the food bank's supply if the acreage sells. Douglas said they'd be directed to a regional distribution partnership. Louise asked what that partnership actually looked like. Douglas said his office was still finalizing that framework. Everyone in that room knew what that phrase meant. Nobody said it out loud. Constance stood up. She said, "Before this vote proceeds, there's a matter of standing I need to raise." She looked at me. She said, "The Pruitt Family Farmland Trust was established under a binding trust with a permanent founding trustee veto clause. That trustee is in this room." Douglas laughed, actually laughed, before he understood what she meant. He said, "Constance, the Pruitt family's been retired from active farming for years. There's no active trustee." Constance slid the notarized documents across the table. She said, "The founding trustee is Otis Pruitt." The room went quiet in a way I've only heard once before. The winter my father drove Edith Marsh her first truckload of grain. Douglas turned around in his chair. He looked at me the way you look at a storm cloud you'd been assured wasn't coming. I stood up. I walked to the front of the hall. Past the slide deck with its clean charts. Past the Marlowe Land Partners logo glowing on the screen. I said, "My name is Otis Pruitt. I've worked this warehouse for 47 years. I built the very first loading dock this co-op ever used." I let that sit a second. Then I said, 44 years ago, my father fed a widow for a full year with nothing asked in return. I built this trust so no hungry family would ever have to depend on luck the way she did." Douglas's face had gone the color of the printout Wanda handed me on the dock. He said, "Otis, I didn't know." I said, "No, you didn't." I said, "You called me folks like Otis's in front of state officials. You never once wondered who I actually was." I said, "That's not an accident. That's a habit. You don't ask questions about people you've already decided don't matter." I turned to the board. I said, "As founding trustee, I am formally exercising my veto." I said, "This is over the sale of the Pruitt Family Farmland Trust acreage." I said, "That land stays in food production, exactly as it has for 30 years. Then I looked at the Marlowe Land Partners logo on the screen. I said, "If this co-op needs $28 million taken out of hungry families' harvest, then the math is wrong." I said, "Find $28 million somewhere that isn't a child's dinner plate." Louise asked Douglas, directly, whether his own consulting fee was tied to the land deal closing. Douglas said the structure was standard industry practice. He didn't say no. Another board member asked when he'd learned about my role in the trust. Douglas said he hadn't known until that moment. Louise asked whether he'd read the trust documents before proposing the sale at all. Douglas didn't answer that one. His silence answered every question better than any word could have. Nobody clapped. Nobody laughed. Constance closed her folder. The quiet click sounded louder than applause. The board voted 8-1 against the sale. Douglas was the one. Within a month, the board opened a review into how the Marlowe land deal had been structured. They wanted to know if Douglas's consulting fee depended on the sale closing. It did. Douglas resigned as board chairman before the review concluded. Nobody forced him out in public. I made sure of that. I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted the acreage safe and the truth on record. I got both. Wanda wasn't allowed to speak at the meeting, but she was waiting in the hallway with 2 other food bank volunteers when the doors opened. Word travels fast in this county. She told me later that Louise Tran walked out first. Louise stopped in front of the 3 of them. She said only, "The acreage stays. Ask Otis Pruitt about it sometime." Wanda said she had to sit down in a hallway chair for a minute. She said she'd known me 18 years and never once suspected. I told her that was rather the point of the whole arrangement. 2 weeks before that, June had mentioned her father was under a lot of pressure lately. I hadn't asked why. I regret that now. A grandfather should ask why, even when the answer is complicated. June called me that same week. She was furious, but not at me. She said, "Grandpa, why didn't you tell me any of this? Not the trust, not the land, not what he was planning?" I told her the truth. I said I didn't know how to tell my own grandchild that her father would sell off food for hungry families for a fee. I said I didn't know how she'd take hearing it from me instead of seeing it herself. She was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "You should have trusted me sooner." She was right. I told her so. Douglas tried calling me twice in the weeks after. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was an apology, stiff and rehearsed, the kind a man writes down before he says it. The second was shorter. He just said, "I hope Faye's okay." I didn't call him back either time. Some apologies are for the person giving them, not the person receiving them. I let him have that one on his own. Douglas and Faye separated 4 months later. I didn't push for that. I never said a word against him to June, not once, even when I had every right to. Some things a father has to let his daughter arrive at on her own. She arrived at it faster than I expected, once the numbers went public. Families at the food bank started thanking her by name at pickup, not knowing how close her husband had come to taking their harvest away. The morning after the vote, I got to the warehouse at 6, like always. I loaded the first truck, same gloves, same worn pallet jack. A young volunteer I'd never spoken to before stopped by the dock. She said, "Are you Mr. Pruitt, the founder?" I said I was. She said her family had relied on the co-op's harvest for 2 years after her father's accident. She said she just wanted to shake my hand. I shook it. Then I went and fixed a jammed dock door. It had been sticking for a week. It wasn't going to fix itself just because a board vote happened. The Pruitt Family Farmland Trust is still producing. It fed over 11,000 families last year. No bills, no questions. Constance had a small plaque installed by the loading dock a few weeks after the vote. It doesn't say Pruitt Family Estate anymore. It says, simply,